Next urgent question, Navandra Mishra.
Mr Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport if she will make a statement on reports regarding racism in cricket.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm appearing here this morning, or this afternoon, in place of my honourable friend, the Sports Minister, who is currently in Geneva having meetings with football officials. If I may, can I start by being very clear on something I know the whole House will agree on? There is no place for racism in sport. Indeed, there is no place for racism anywhere in society. It must be confronted, it must be eradicated, and it should never be written off as just banter. The Government is extremely concerned by the reports of racism at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. Quite simply, the situation faced by Azim Rafiq was unacceptable. It should never have been allowed to happen in the first place, and it should have been dealt with properly during the initial investigation. We have been clear with the England and Wales Cricket Board that this needs a full, transparent investigation, both into the incidents involving Azim Rafiq, but also into the wider cultural issues at Yorkshire Cricket Club. The ECB are now investigating this fully and took action against Yorkshire on Friday, stripping them of the right to host international matches and have suspended a player. We have also seen a number of resignations from the board at Yorkshire, quite rightly, including the chairman. Lord Patel of Bradford has now taken over as chairman of the cricket club and has set out the approach he will be taking to tackle the issue at Yorkshire. Crucially, he has started by apologising to Azim Rafiq, but we know this will not undo the pain Azim feels. More action is now needed, and we have called on Lord Patel and the ECB to fully investigate, to eradicate racism where it exists, and tackle the subculture that can support it. In addition to that, the ECB is now undertaking a regulatory process and must take strong action where it is needed. They must be transparent and swift for the benefit of cricket. They have also launched an independent commission for equity in cricket, looking at issues more widely that go beyond just Yorkshire, chaired by Cindy Butts, a highly respected anti-racism campaigner who was a board member of the Kick It Out campaign in football and is also, Mr Speaker, as you know, a lay member of your committee on IPSA. I have great confidence that Cindy Butts is independent and has a phenomenal track record in this area. This terrible case, the awful case of the abuse that Azim Rafiq should never have suffered but did suffer, shows how much more needs to be done to stamp out racism in the game. And I urge anyone who has experienced discrimination in cricket to come forward to Cindy Butts' commission and report what they have experienced. In addition to that, I understand that the Equality and Human Rights Commission have also requested information about this incident, which is quite right, and I encourage the EHRC in their work on this. Sport should be for everyone, and it should not take cases such as this to bring that to life. The Government applauds Azim Rafiq's courage in speaking out and encourages anyone else similarly affected to do the same. This must be a watershed moment for cricket. The Government will now closely scrutinise the actions of the ECB. My colleague, the Sport Minister, met them on this topic last week. And we're going to scrutinise the actions that Yorkshire Cricket Club take in response to these damning allegations. The investigations I've referred to need to be thorough, they need to be transparent, and they need to be public. That is necessary to restore the public's faith in cricket and beyond. Parliament is watching, the Government is watching, and the country is watching. We expect real action, and the Government stands ready to step in and take action if they do not put their own house in order.
We go back to Navandra Mishra.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to you for granting this urgent question. The leaked racism report from Yorkshire County Cricket Club has exposed the extent to which serious allegations of discrimination have been mishandled, covered up, and it seems sadly entirely ignored over a long period of time. Players and former board members of the club have since come forward expressing their regret. But, Mr Speaker, this is too little, too late. The question of how to address this should not solely be on what to do next, but rather how did the club get to this low point? Why were players not properly investigated? Why were there no processes in place to address these allegations? And, Mr. Speaker, why did it take the leaking of this report to kick the club into action? I know members on both sides of the House have publicly shared how appalled they are, so I hope the Minister today outlines what concrete action government intends to take to tackle racism in sport. I know my good friend, the Honourable Member for Leeds North West, wrote to Mr Mark Arthur, but unfortunately hasn't received a response to his letter. The news over the past week has focused on cricket because of this report, but we know that it is not just cricket alone that racism and discrimination festers. The intervention by the government on this particular issue must be a model for how other sports address racism. Mr Speaker, I want to express my solidarity with Mr Azim Rafiq, who has shown great bravery in the face of this injustice, and all those that have been discriminated against in cricket and other sports. Sport should be for everyone. No one should be excluded or belittled because of their race, gender, sexual orientation or disability. And I hope today is a landmark to start addressing these serious issues. In light of this leaked racism report, which I hope will be published in full this week, I hope the Equality and Human Rights Commission investigate Yorkshire County Cricket Club and publish a full set of recommendations for how they tackle racism moving forward. We must not forget that it was only until there was financial repercussions and corporate pressure that Yorkshire County actually acted. This is simply unacceptable, Mr Speaker. We also know that almost a third of all cricket players at grassroots levels in the UK are from ethnic minority background. However, this figure drops to only 4% when it comes to cricketers with a professional contract. This is shocking. So I hope today that government sets out how they intend to work with the England and Wales Cricket Board to ensure there is independent scrutiny over the sport so that incidents like this never happen again and that the sport is diversified at all levels. Mr Speaker, I thank you again for allowing this urgent question.
Mr Speaker, I'll try and respond briefly to the further questions. I completely agree with the point. The conduct of Yorkshire Cricket Club in this matter by trying to brush it under the carpet and ignore it is completely unacceptable, and it is right that the chairman and others have resigned. Their conduct the conduct of the cricket club has no justification whatsoever. It is disgraceful, and we unreservedly condemn it. The point about transparency of these reports is a very important one. They need to be done in public. They need to be open. The country and Parliament need to be able to fully scrutinise them. I agree with his points about wider action that is needed in cricket. The ECB itself does have, in its county partnership agreement in clause 10, requirements to increase ethnic minority representation. We need to hold them to account to deliver those. And in terms of independent oversight of what Yorkshire and the ECB are doing, obviously the Equality and Human Rights Commission is independent, and they are now quite rightly asking questions. So the government fully supports that process and, like members of this House, will be following it and scrutinising it extremely carefully.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
I stand in solidarity with the Honourable Member for Stockport and thank him for bringing this to the House today. I think that if I can recognise both you, Mr Speaker, and his constituency, the Lancashire League was the first to show that you could have teams which were inclusive and show an example to the rest of the country. The issue that Matthew Said raised in his article in the Times today was what's the minimum test of credibility? And it's clear that this club has failed that. But I don't think we should be pointing the finger just at one club. We should be asking, where does discrimination, inequality and barriers to access exist in other sports and other parts of life? And I say here on the floor of the House that when we discovered that one of our local councillors in Worthing had said unacceptable things in the patriotic alternative white supremacist website, we suspended him. There's now a by-election, and we have a South Asian candidate who's longed to be a Tory a councillor standing. It shows that action can be taken, and whatever your party politics, we need to stand together on this. The final point I would like to put to my honourable friend is if we're going to ask the EHRC to take on this particular role in greater depth, they'll need extra funding. And I suggest that they talk with the EHRC and see how much extra funding they need and add it on so they don't push aside other parts of their important work.
Yeah, well, I associate myself with the Father of the House's characteristically wise words. I agree, we do need to stand together across the whole House, combating and fighting racism, whichever part of our society it occurs in. And I think the example he gave locally is a good example of that. Of course, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission is independent. They will make their own decisions about what to investigate, but clearly I think this House is encouraging them in their work. They did, I believe, receive a funding uplift not so long ago, but of course their funding arrangements remain under continual review.
SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I should go to the Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this urgent question. I too want to pay tribute to the bravery and persistence of Azim Rafiq. He has already given others the courage to come forward, and I'm sure that more will do so. Racism destroys lives, and that is why allegations must be properly, fairly and transparently investigated, and the handling of this case is a textbook example of what should not happen. A legal investigation team second-guessed by the club's panel, a failure to apply the legal tests correctly to the evidence gathered. Yorkshire even changed the inquiry terms of reference partway through, preventing the investigation team from drawing conclusions about institutional racism. And one has to wonder whether they were taking lessons from the Prime Minister about this. Yesterday, Lord Patel took the first steps to begin to right these wrongs. The next step must be that the rest of the board leave their posts. Their role in this shameful fiasco gives them no right to continue to hold positions of power in the club. And I too hope that the EHRC will formally investigate what has occurred. Racism has no place in cricket or any sport, and as Michael Holding has said of this case, each sport or industry can try and put their house in order, but the message has to reach society at large, or no real meaningful change can take place. Society at large includes all of us here, and it includes, of course, the Prime Minister. His well-publicised comments in the past have helped enforce a culture where racism is seen as banter. So it is good to hear today from the Minister those strong words about committing to stamping out racism. But the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State need to understand that words alone are not enough. They must lead by example. Failing to do so gives credence and encouragement to racists.
Well, I think we should avoid making party political points on an occasion like this. I think we should be standing together as we do and as we have been doing to resolutely condemn racism and to tackle it wherever it is found. And that means making sure that the investigation is independent and transparent, the ECHB one. It means supporting the work of the Independent Commission chaired by Cindy Butt that has been established, and of course it means supporting the EHRC in any work that they do. I agree with the Shadow Secretary of State in her remarks about the board of the cricket club. They bear collective responsibility, and I don't see how they can continue.
Julian Knight, Chair of the...
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wish to thank the Honourable Member for Stockport for bringing this UQ to the House. I refer members to my register of interests. Mr Speaker, like many cricket lovers in this country, I feel a fool. I thought my sport was more colourblind than most, but it most certainly isn't. At Yorkshire, it's clearly institutionally racist. And Lord Patel has the mother of all jobs turning that once venerable club around. I would like to just chide the club just now in terms of the report. Despite promising publicly to issue the report to myself and also to the government, they have not done so far. That report needs to be on our hands today. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this is more than a Yorkshire problem? This is a national problem within cricket, and although I agree the likes of the ECB must now have a permanent place on the board of Yorkshire to make sure that it's guided to a better place, I think we need substantially better whistleblowing, that we need substantially better procedures in the sport, and the likes of Emily Rainford-Brent and Sir Michael Holding, who are frankly an inspiration, not just to cricket, but to the wider sport and our society. They should be front and centre of cricket's battle against racism. It's going to be a tough fight, Mr Speaker, but the whole House, I can truly believe, agree that it's one that must be won, and must be won in the open so we can all see exactly what is going on.
Gently say to the Minister that I totally agree that if information is being withheld from a select committee carrying its duties, this is a major matter and I hope it will be resolved today on behalf of the committee. Minister.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the comments the Select Committee Chairman has made. On the question of the report, the Government has also requested that report. As of about 1 hour ago, when I was last briefed on this, we had not received it. And I would like to make clear that both the Select Committee should receive a copy of that report, the Government should receive a copy of that report, and it should be put into the public domain. So let me make very clear today from the dispatch box that Yorkshire County Cricket Club should do that immediately. In regards to the rest of the Select Committee Chairman's remarks, he put it with great eloquence and power, and I agree entirely with every word that he said.
Try again. SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Second time lucky, Mr Speaker, thank you. I certainly agree with all that has been said thus far, including what you've said from the Chair, Mr Speaker. Racism has no place in cricket, sport or society, period. And this shocking episode comes out during the T20 World Cup, and at a time when we should be celebrating all that's good with the game. And that being said, Scotland may not have had the results that we would have liked in the World Cup, but their performance in qualifying has been exemplary. But to turn to the important matters at hand, Azim Rafiq must be commended for his bravery in coming forward and speaking out on Yorkshire's shameful racist treatment of him. Conversely, Yorkshire's actions almost from start to finish have been disgraceful. As yet, the report, as we've just been hearing, remains unpublished and have been forced into publishing a summary and only then sending a heavily redacted version to Mr Rafiq was a further sign that all was not right. The credibility of some of the report's findings must also be questioned, with a racist term used against Mr Rafiq deemed to be friendly and good-natured banter. It's clear that Yorkshire have a lot of work to do, but does the Minister have confidence that the ECB are the right body to oversee a culture change in cricket, given they've been repeatedly warned about this issue for years? Moreover, does she agree with the Health Secretary, who suggested that if the ECB doesn't take strong action as a result of these events, then it's not fit for purpose?
And well, I broadly agree with many of the sentiments just expressed. I mean, I certainly agree, firstly, that racist abuse of the kind suffered by Azim Rafiq is most certainly not banter. It is racist abuse, and it should be called out, and action should be taken whenever and wherever it occurs. In relation to the ECB, I do have a high level of confidence in the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, which is being chaired by Cindy Bucks, who, as I said, is a very highly respected anti-racism campaigner. But the eyes of the country and of Parliament are upon them. The ECHR are looking at this as well. We expect them to do their duty.
Kevin Holly-Ray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing forward this very important, urgent question. Somebody who has played cricket in Yorkshire for the best part of 40 years, Mr Speaker, sadly not for Yorkshire, but in Yorkshire. But I've got to say, I have not heard that term expressed on a cricket field or in a dressing room for many decades. But nevertheless, this reflects very badly on the whole of Yorkshire cricket. And can I urge upon my honourable friend, when we get to the bottom of this, that those who are responsible for this kind of language are sanctioned, and the people who have described this language as banter also face sanctions.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything my honourable friend just said. This language is quite clearly not banter. Those who used it should face consequences, and those who tolerated it and condoned it and covered it up and hid it should face sanctions as well. I agree with everything my honourable friend said.
Mohammed Hussain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I firstly join others in condemning the vile language directed at Azim Rafiq and the blatant culture of racism that has been exposed? And, Mr Speaker, it's shocking that the report, even after all this, that this House has requested a copy of the full report and has been denied it. Mr Speaker, the language faced by Azim, as was quite rightly pointed out, is not friendly banter. It is racism, plain and simple, and the failure of Yorkshire cricket to recognise it taking place under their nose is just the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger problem. That problem is the normalisation of racism in so many sports, such as cricket and football. And you only have to ask any young person in my constituency in Bradford who has ever picked up a bat and ball about the obstacles that they face on a daily basis because of this normalisation. Mr Speaker, the reality remains that we can, I've listened to the Minister, the reality remains that we cannot tackle the racism present in many sports if we only change the boards and not the culture. So what the Minister needs to do is commit today to a top-to-bottom review of professional sporting bodies to directly challenge the normalisation of racism.
Minister.
Yeah, well, I agree that the normalisation of racism is something we all have to fight. Each and every one of us have a duty and an ability to do that. And I think as far as cricket is concerned, as I've said already a couple of times, I have enormous confidence in Cindy Butt as a highly respected anti-racism campaigner to lead that independent commission for equity in cricket and sort out the problems which evidently exist there. I mean, more widely across society, the government obviously has a hate crime strategy. We've got a race disparity audit we've done, a race disparity unit. And in terms of hate, we will be bringing forward quite shortly the online safety bill, which is designed to clean up the sewer online, where so much of this hatred often gets spread.
That's sharp.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Stockport and I thank Azim Rafiq for his bravery, because not only was he exposed to racism and not only did he suffer it, he was denied an inquiry, and it was only yesterday that it was acknowledged that what he did was actually whistleblow. Yeah. Much of the racism, Mr Speaker, faced by Azim Rafiq at Yorkshire Cricket Club was blatant racism and Islamophobia, and he has said he was as such. I recognise the Minister and other members of the Government have stood in solidarity with cross-party colleagues in challenging the racism in specific case. But I also welcome Lord Kamlesh Patel, a fellow Bradfordian's appointment. But it can't be just left to Lord Kamlesh Patel to fix this culture on his own. Yeah. And the truth is that sadly the Government, and I appreciate the Minister's essence of this debate is about cross-party unity. But the truth is, for 2.5 years, we've been waiting for a definition of Islamophobia. No government advisers have been appointed in 2.5 years. Yeah. The definition provided by the All-Party Parliamentary Group, which the Muslim community stood behind, has been denied by the government. So in that collegiate essence of this debate, will the Minister and the Government meet with the All-Party Parliamentary Group so that we can reach a definition of Islamophobia? Because without it, how do we understand that Islamophobia is rooted in racism, and what do we do to address it?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I would like to just repeat again my admiration for Azim Rafiq, for his courage in standing up to the appalling racism he suffered at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. I understand it is clearly by no means an isolated example. Root and branch change is needed in that club, and the recent appointment of Lord Patel of Bradford, I hope, is an important first step. But that is only a first step. Root and branch change is needed. Across cricket, more widely, again, the Commission for Equity in Cricket, chaired by Cindy Butts, has that mission in mind. On the more general question, of course, we need to create a culture in this country where racism is fought at every step and every stage. That is why we have a race disparity unit. That's why we have a hate crime strategy. That's why we're bringing forward the online safety bill. In relation to the particular question about the definition, my colleague, the Equalities Minister, the member for Saffron Walden, I know, is working on that, and I will convey the question and ask her to make contact urgently with you to discuss that issue.
Robbie Moore.
Mr Speaker, Yorkshire County Cricket Club are supposed to represent each and every person of our great county, but these reports show that they have failed our entire Yorkshire community and indeed the whole sporting community. It is right that the board members at Yorkshire who turned a blind eye to racist accusations have resigned, but does my right honourable friend agree with me that the ECB must now take responsibility for neglecting racism in cricket, and that individuals there must also consider their positions?
Look, and I agree with my honourable friend that the failings at Yorkshire County Cricket Club are deep and they have been long-lasting, and those people responsible, some have resigned already. I think there are others, as the Shadow Minister and I said earlier, who should now consider their position and do the same. In terms of the ECB, My colleague, the Sport Minister, met them last week to raise exactly those issues, to hold them to account and make clear that the expectation of Parliament and the public is that they take responsibility for fixing these problems that they have allowed to occur on their watch. We are scrutinising their actions. The public are watching, Parliament is watching. We now expect them to act.
Brenda Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. First, let me congratulate and thank my dear friend from Stockport for securing this urgent question. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are talking about structural racism and institutional inequality in the society. Does the Minister agree that community sports projects run in the community that bring people of different faiths and backgrounds together are key to breaking racism in sport? And will he agree to meet with successful teams in my constituency, Ealing Southall, to understand the challenges they face?
Well, I think the honourable member is quite right to point to grassroots sport as the place where everything starts and the place where culture is set. The person he, I think, should meet is the Sport Minister, my honourable friend, the member for Mid Worcestershire, who is in Geneva today. But I will certainly pass that request on, and I am certain that he will readily agree.
Scott Benton.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this absolutely appalling case follows several high-profile examples in other sports of racism this year. The efforts to address racism in football, for example, through taking the knee, have sadly met with a mixed reaction from fans, and so although it's clear that we need a new anti-racism strategy across all sports, it's important this brings everybody with them on that strategy. What steps have the government taken to develop such an initiative across all sports?
Well, in relation to football specifically, in response to what happened last summer, the scope of football banning orders were extended to cover not just racist abuse happening in football grounds, but racist abuse perpetrated by fans online as well. That was quick and decisive action that was taken there. I think in terms of wider racist abuse online, the Online Safety Bill is designed to address that. The hate crime strategy and the race disparity unit are all designed to fight racism in sport and across society as a whole.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I absolutely associate myself and my party with remarks already made in this place. Racism is absolutely unacceptable anywhere whatsoever. In Scotland, we have a useful expression which is, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, we're all John Thompson's children. It means we're all the same, we're all human beings. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I served for 12 years in the Scottish Parliament, and a scar on the face of Scottish sport has been sectarianism for a long time. But I give credit where it's due. The Scottish Government has recognised this and is working hard to tackle it. Some would say, perhaps not successfully, some would say successfully, but never mind, the intention is there, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could I recommend to Her Majesty's Government that they talk to the Scottish Government about what is being done north of the border, and it may well help stamp out the evil of racism in the rest of the UK?
Well, we always talk to administrations around the whole United Kingdom, but let me assure the honourable gentleman, this government's commitment to stamping out racism in cricket, in sport and anywhere we find it is absolute.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I too am grateful to the honourable member, my friend for Stockport, for raising the important issue of racism in cricket in the House today. Just yesterday, I met with Cricket Wales and heard about the work that they're doing in my constituency with the brilliant Miskin Cricket Club to tackle misogyny and inequality at grassroots level. But racism and discrimination in any form is utterly unacceptable, and it cannot be that cricket is allowed to continue as a sport for only the most privileged communities. So I ask the Minister, exactly what steps will his department be taking to break this cycle and instead encourage true diversity in the sport? We need deeds, not words.
Well, diversity and inclusion, I know, runs through the entire ethos of DCMS's interaction with sporting bodies and the way that it funds sport at grassroots levels, as the member for Ealing Southall said a moment ago, right up to the top. It touches every element of the way that we fund and work with sport. On the question of cricket in particular, again, Cindy Butt's Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket is designed to address exactly the questions which the Honourable Lady quite rightly just raised.
Marsha Kadova.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by just congratulating my honourable friend for Stockport for securing this important, urgent question. And I agree with the remarks that have already been made here this afternoon. Racism, in all its forms, whether it's in sport or society, is wrong and needs to be stamped out. We all saw what happened last summer when the racist attacks on our black England football players took place at the leadership of what many would describe from the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister when they failed to condemn it. Now, to tackle racism requires leadership. So if the Minister is going to actually bring his words to life, what he needs to commit to today is implementing a proper race equality strategy that will seek to tackle institutional and structural racism across society. That includes sport, that includes in the labour market, and that includes in our education system.
Well, look, I mean, when we saw the racist abuse suffered by those footballers in the final of the European Championships at Wembley back in the summer, there was universal condemnation of that, and it was universal condemnation followed by action in the form of the extension of those football banning orders to include online racist abuse that previously wasn't covered, and a matter that will be further addressed in the online safety bill in the very near future. In terms of her question about the wider questions, we've had the Commission for Racial Disparity give its initial report, and the government will be coming forward with a further plan in that area, which my colleague, the Minister for Equalities, will be leading.
Thomas.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I strongly associate myself with the praise for the courage of Azam Razik, the condemnation of institutional racism at Yorkshire Cricket Club more generally, and the concerns raised by the Honourable Lady for Bradford about the lack of a government-backed definition for Islamophobia. But I think there are two other specific things that the Minister should focus on. Firstly, it is the fact that last year Sport England found a 14-point gap between the percentage of white British people participating in sport and the number of British Asians taking part in sport. So it would be good to hear what the Minister is going to do to put a target in place to bring that gap down quickly. And secondly, there were members of Yorkshire Cricket Club raising concerns about what was going on, but the governance structures at Yorkshire Cricket Club quite clearly did not allow those concerns to get to the very top and have an impact. There is rightly a campaign for fans to have a seat on the board of football clubs. Isn't it time for such a consideration too to be given to fans on cricket clubs as well?
Well, I think the question about encouraging participation is a good one, and I know that my colleague, the Sports Minister, who deals with this on a day-to-day basis, in his dealing with various representative sports bodies and in the way that he constructs funding arrangements, is resolutely focused on increasing participation in sports across all backgrounds in this country, both ethnic but also social. There are other metrics and other dimensions as well besides just ethnicity. And that is a very important piece of work that he is taking forward. In relation to the representation on the boards, I think that is exactly the kind of question that Cindy Butt's review will be addressing. I hope she's listening to today's proceedings and will take that as an idea for her review to carry forward. Because it is, I do agree with the Honourable Member for Harrow West that there were catastrophic failings of governance going over many years at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and that is why it's right that the chairman resigned. I think if anyone is left from that regime, they should resign as well.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Luton South, children are flourishing when playing local grassroots community cricket through excellent programmes led by organisations such as Wickets, which particularly focuses on community cohesion. But it's clear that structural inequalities, particularly around race and class, are going to, as writ large by the issues and the allegations at Yorkshire County Cricket, are going to place huge barriers in their way if they want to pursue their dreams and make it as a professional in cricket. So what actions is the Minister taking to stamp out discrimination in all its forms within cricket and sport in the UK?
As I've said already, Mr Speaker, the Independent Commission for Equity in Sport, chaired by a highly respected anti-racism campaigner, is going into exactly those issues, and I'm sure will be making concrete recommendations which the ECB and the government will be taking very, very seriously. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission is asking questions, as I've said. If the ECB, in their work, do not do what this House expects, the government is prepared to act.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Over 50 years ago, Asian cricketers set up their own leagues and tournaments in Yorkshire because cricketers were not getting the recognition in the sport that they deserved for their talent. And they certainly weren't being picked up by the head of the sport in that county, which is Yorkshire Cricket Club. So this problem has been existing in broad daylight for generations, and the ECB has done precious little to deal with it. Now, if we are going to deal with this issue, we can't only look at Yorkshire Cricket Club. We have to look beyond that and go and talk to those people about what has been going on in Yorkshire for a very long time, and perhaps even look beyond Yorkshire at other areas where this sort of institutional racism takes place. But we need a root and branch investigation into what has been going on.
Yeah, well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely correct, and that is precisely what the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, chaired by Cindy Butts, is going to be doing, asking exactly those questions the honourable member just posed, not just at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, which clearly has the most appalling, very long-standing, from what he said, it sounds like multi-decade problems, but across cricket more widely. It's essential that work happens, and I would just take this opportunity to say to anyone in cricket who is either as a Member of Parliament or members of the public or players, coaching staff, parents who have experienced the kind of appalling and unacceptable racism we've heard about, to make sure they give evidence to this independent commission so their voice is heard, their story is heard, and action can be taken.
And finally, Jim Shannon.
Can I also just thank the Minister for his response. It's been very helpful. Does the Minister not agree that the sport of cricket embodies the very sense of multiculturalism, and that those who are caught in racist speak or acts should not have the privilege to don the whites or even to watch the wonderful play? So what steps can and will the Minister, not just to reduce but instead to implement a zero-tolerance policy?
Well, I agree with the member for Strangford that where players are found to have committed acts of racism, they should suffer consequences. A mere slap on the wrist or an admonishment is clearly not enough. And in that spirit, I understand that the ECB have already suspended from eligibility for England's selection one of the players at Yorkshire County Cricket Club who was guilty of racially abusing Azim Rafiq. And I hope that both county cricket clubs, the ECB, cricket clubs more generally, sporting clubs more generally as well, take exactly that kind of action whenever they find examples of this kind of unacceptable behaviour. And let us say, as a House today, that is what we expect them to do.
Oh, point of order. Jo Stevens.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I wonder if I might ask your advice. I believe that the Minister has just inadvertently misled the House on 2 occasions in his responses to questions. In July, the Prime Minister accepted Labour's request to extend football banning orders to online racist abuse. I raised the fact that nothing had been done about this in oral questions to the new Secretary of State for DCMS on the 16th of September. She wasn't able to answer the question and so said that she would write to me. She's actually written to me today, some 2 months on, in which she says, effectively, that nothing has been done yet because it will require primary legislation to extend football banning orders. So they clearly are not in force. Action has not been taken, and I wonder if you might advise me how the record could be corrected.
Further to that point of order, Minister.
Well, I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for her point of order. As I said at the beginning, I'm covering today's debate for the Sports Minister, and she is quite right that it is a commitment, a clear and a firm commitment, and the Department are currently working on ways to implement this as quickly as possible, and I will make sure that my colleague, the Sports Minister and Secretary of State, deliver this commitment as expeditiously as they possibly can.